All right, so this will be a video on Easter and Lent, two traditions that typically go together in Catholicism, especially. But we know that most Christians do Easter regardless. So we're going to start with Lent, how basically it's just a tradition that is pushed by the Catholic Church that it's unbiblical and it's nowhere in Scripture. So it's exactly what the Pharisees are doing, enforcing something that has nothing to do with the Bible. So uh, our friend Bible Thumper here, he's going to go ahead and start with that.
Okay, so to start, we're going to go with Psalm 40, verse 6. Sacrifice and offering thou didst not desire, mine ears thou hast opened. Burnt offering and sin offering hast thou not required. So basically, burnt offerings to God are basically like, well, they would do them for the feasts, but it's just like a sacrifice. It's something you give up, right? Lent is literally a season about giving up things. He doesn't desire your little petty offerings and stuff. He's got enough of that, but he desires more than that. He desires your obedience. That's why it talks about mine ear thou hast opened. The word for open there means pierced, and that's the key of David. That's permanent servanthood that he desires. But this video is not for the key of David. So
And
next,
fasting, that is in a sense a burnt offering. So that's what you do during Lent, you fast.
yep. The next, for I have desired mercy, not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. But they, like men, have transgressed the covenant. There they have dealt treacherously against me. So again, it says, you just restates it in Hosea, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. He doesn't desire you to sacrifice for Lent. He doesn't desire you to give up your favorite meal or whatever. He desires you to obey him regardless of the time or situation. Right? And then First Timothy 4:3, this is what the Catholics are known for, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth. Right? This is talking about forbidding to marry, obviously the Catholic priesthood, and commanding to abstain from meats. The word for meats there just means food in general. So it's just Lent, basically. It's commanding to abstain from all food in general and just the fast that they do. Matthew 11:19, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, Behold, a gluttonous and a winebibber, a friend of publicans and sinners, but wisdom is justified of her children. Even Yeshua came eating and drinking, and the Pharisees judged him for not fasting, for not doing all those little petty things, right? So you guys cast judgment on people who don't give up stuff for Lent, apparently. It's exactly what you guys are doing. In Isaiah 58, I don't want to read the entire chapter. It talks about how that's not a fast pleasing to God. It talks about how people seek him daily, but they only do the fast for their own, like they only do it for their own gain. They do it for little petty things, like they think fasting will give them righteousness in the eyes of God. But that's not what his true fasting is about. His true fast is the only fast is the key of David fast, and the sacrifices of God are a broken and contrite spirit. Those are the only things you need in terms of fasting for God.
Right.
So jumping to Easter, Matthew, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, one more thing. Mark chapter 7, you actually want to read like those verses 6 to 9 at least.
Yes, sure. Mark chapter 7, verses 6 through 9. He answered and said unto them, Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, This people honoureth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandments of God, ye hold to the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cups, and many such like things ye do. And he said unto them, Full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition.
Right. So this is like exactly what they're doing with this. Basically, what in their religion, at least, it's a mandatory thing to do. Like you're making people fast, like at these random times, I guess. And this is nowhere commanded in the Bible, so it's literally what the Pharisees are doing, pushing their own traditions instead of the commandments of God, and it's just adding burdens to people. It's exactly what the Pharisees did, like the church's modern day Pharisees. So that's the point we're getting at with Lent, and then you'll see also, especially the holding on to your traditions that break the commandments of God, you'll see that with what Easter really is. So I'm going to start with just a brief little I'm trying not gonna try not to read too much, but I'll read a little bit about the history of Easter. You could just look up most of the stuff for yourself. But um, so here's the pagan origins of it. So in 1853, Jacob Grimm argued that the Easter hare was connected to a goddess he imagined would have been called Ostara in ancient German, He derived this name from the Anglo-Saxon goddess Eostre, who Bede, an early medieval monk considered to be the father of English history, mentioned in 731 CE or AD. Bede noted that in the 8th century England, the month of April was called Eostermonath, or Eostre month, after the goddess Eostre. He wrote that the pagan festival of spring, the name of the goddess, had become assimilated into the Christian celebration of the resurrection of Christ. So it became assimilated into the festival for the resurrection of Christ. You'll see many different things regarding that here, but recent archaeological research appears to confirm the worship of Eostre in parts of England and Germany, with the hare as her main symbol. The Easter Bunny therefore seems to recall the pre-Christian celebrations of spring, her heralded by the vernal equinox and personified by the goddess Eostre. So that's a little bit for the little hare, because like bunnies, obviously that doesn't have anything to do with the Messiah. That's actually a symbol of another god. Um, Let's see. The pre-Christian ancient world is filled with stories of resurrection around spring. One of the world's oldest civilizations, the Sumer, who lived in southern Mesopotamia, modern southern Iraq, inscribed a story of their goddess, Iana, into a clay tablet some 2,000 years before Christ. So Iana, that's the same goddess as Eostre or Astarte, Ishtar. She has many different names. She is the queen of heaven. And this was like a fertility goddess. And this is really what this whole celebration is about. They're all just same names from the dis for the different, or sorry, they're all different names for the same goddess. It's just like how Baal has many names throughout history too. So the story goes that Diana descended into the underworld to find her recently deceased husband. There she was killed before being brought back to life by other gods. She was permitted to return to the world as the sun for 6 months before having to descend into the underworld once again. It's basically just a bunch of garbage. Like it's mythology, paganism. Once again, during the winter for a further 6 months, it is perhaps the first ancient story of resurrection and rebirth centered on spring. So there's many more stories amongst ancient civilizations follow a similar theme, including the resurrection of Horus, the falcon-headed ancient Egyptian deity, the death and rebirth of the Greek god Dionysus. There are stories that share ideologies about renewal and light conquering darkness. As Christianity began to sweep across Europe, many pagan festivals and traditions were absorbed and adapted into the Christian faith. It made sense that the already ingrained concept of new life being celebrated during springtime should become associated with Jesus, or his real name Yeshua, conquering death and being reborn. So, um, if you notice, the date of Easter changes every year, and it's because it's governed by the phases of the moon and not a specific date on which Christ was said to have risen from the dead. Um, and then I want to go the Easter egg, where did that come from? Dating back to ancient times, eggs like the rabbits have also been symbols of new life and fertility in various cultures. As Christianity absorbed pagan spring traditions, the egg was also adapted to become the perfect representation of Jesus's resurrection, the eggshell symbolizing the tomb. So really, they're just trying to find explanations in the Bible for why they're doing these pagan traditions, and they're making that up after they've already adopted the pagan tradition. So it's really just an excuse for why they have these pagan traditions. They try, oh no, it's actually about the Messiah. Like how is an egg, how are bunnies related to the Messiah? It's all about a bunch of ancient pagan nonsense, basically. So, and then finally, the last thing I wanted to mention, historically, the hot cross bun, that delicious Easter staple, whose name and cross are said to symbolize the crucifixion of Jesus, is also believed to have pagan origins. A part of the pagan celebration of Eostre, buns, marked with a cross, would be baked across pre-Christian Europe to celebrate the springtime goddess. The symbolism of the cross and the bun was said to represent the four seasons, as well as the four primary phases of the moon. The bun was absorbed by Christianity, and the meaning of its cross was adapted. So again, it's taking a pagan symbolism and it's trying to find an excuse for it as to how it somehow relates to the Messiah. So you'll see that a lot. They're adapting paganism and they're basically mixing the holy with the profane, and the Bible says do not do this. Especially this, let me see what's next. I guess I'll just mention this one because we're already on the topic of the hot cross buns. It's in Jeremiah 7, verse 18. Can you actually pull that up and just read that one first, Bible Thumper?
Okay. And we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings unto her. Did we make her cakes to worship her and pour out drink offerings unto her without our men?
right,
So that just goes to really just prove what they were doing back in the day, the hot cross buns, all those traditions, right, of feasting at Easter, right? They were doing all that. They were doing it to the Queen of Heaven.
exactly. So like the hot cross buns, that's the cakes baked to the Queen of Heaven, Iana, Eostre, Ishtar, Astarte, whatever you want to call her. It's the same goddess with a bunch of different names. And it's just a tradition that's actually been recorded in the Bible in Jeremiah 7 there. And also in these the next verse he's going to mention Jeremiah 44.
Right. Before I do that, I just want to just say, the entire thing of Holy Week, as they call it, with Good Friday being what they think is the crucifixion of the Messiah, Sunday being the resurrection, right? That's all a bunch of bogus. All right. First of all, the Messiah was prophesied to pass away in the middle of the week, right? That's the first thing, and it's just stuff that they made up throughout time. So the next verse is Ezekiel 8 verse 14 to prove that. And then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was towards the north, and behold, there sat a woman weeping for Tammuz. So it just shows that they were already doing this weeping thing. They were already doing these other things, what's it called, fasting and all of that type of stuff for
Right,
these pagan gods, right? And then they just adapted it into Christianity. Fasting itself isn't a bad thing. Even Daniel fasted. Even some of the prophets may have fasted, right? But it's not something that's mandatory for salvation.
right. And I don't have it pulled up right now, but there's some like pagan relations to like the fasting for 40 days around that time. Like the pagan Mexicans did it, and in Kurdistan, which are the descendants of the people from Babylon, they even still have this similar practice of fasting 40 days around this time. So it was for the sun too, for the pagan Mexicans. I'd have to bring it up, but um, so yeah, I think what do you got next, Battle Thumper?
Yeah, I have next just Jeremiah 10 verse 2. Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them, right? So that's what they're
Exactly,
doing.
yeah. And the signs of heaven, what is that? Well, winter solstice and spring equinox. Because, they try to associate the four seasons or whatever, their fertility, their new life idea concept, and they try to put that into their worship. And well, they're dismayed at the signs of heaven, just like the heathen are said to do.
Right. It says here, the children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead the dough, to make cakes to the queen of heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger.
Right,
Right. The next, Galatians 4:10. This is probably one of the most twisted Paul things. Ye observe days, months, times, and years. This is talking about paganism. It's not talking about the Sabbath day. Okay, it's talking about other worshiping other gods. This phrase, worshiping on days, months, times, and years, right? This phrase is mentioned in the Old Testament when I'm pretty sure it was Solomon who was worshiping other gods and he was building like monuments to them, or just other times in the Old Testament. If you read the Old Testament, you'll find a phrase similar to this or exactly the same that says people were doing this. It's not about the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day was given as a commandment, so as one of the Ten Commandments, one of the covenants. So this wouldn't be according to the Sabbath day.
yeah, exactly. People twist it very horribly when you read Galatians 4 verses 8 to 11. You read the whole thing. It's very clearly talking about going back to the bondage of serving other pagan gods. Remember, that was a problem back in Acts 15. They had to tell them to stop eating food sacrificed to idols. And really, this is talking about Christmas and Easter, the hot cross buns that's sacrificed to the Queen of Heaven, like the dinners you eat during these days. Like these are the days it's talking about, the pagan feast days. Because if it was talking about the biblical ones, like God's actual feast days, then it wouldn't they wouldn't be restored in the future according to prophecy. It makes no sense that these things would be called bondage by Paul, but then, the Messiah calls the Sabbath a day for man, a blessing. So, I mean, speaking of the Sabbath day, Easter also promotes the breaking of other biblical laws like the Sabbath day, because, they prepare all the food on Sabbath. So they're going out buying and selling, breaking the Sabbath to do it. That's what it talks about. They're picking up sticks in Jeremiah 7. So that's actually an idiom for breaking the Sabbath, because remember, Numbers 15, they did that. And then eating ham, that's traditionally the thing that they eat on Easter. Well, ham is unclean. If you read Isaiah 66, God's going to slay people who eat pork in the tribulation. It's breaking his dietary laws. So really, there's so many things that it's just like breaking all these commandments of God with this one pagan festival. And speaking of Sunday, that's not actually the day the Messiah was resurrected. We mentioned a little briefly, but quickly go more in depth. He rose on the Sabbath day, 3 days and 3 nights after he died on Wednesday, in the midst of the week, like Daniel 9, verses 26 and 27 prophesies. So the big blunder that they made when they put this whole tradition together is they tried to fit 3 days and 3 nights into Friday evening to Sunday morning, and that just does not fit. Maybe part of 3 days, but 3 days and 3 nights. He said it so you couldn't twist it. So really, this whole thing is false worship. It's not related to when the Messiah was actually resurrected. Otherwise, it would be on the Sabbath day. And really, it's just a false tradition, like Mark chapter 7 verses 6 to 9. That's essentially what all these unbiblical traditions are that they enforce, and it has nothing to do with the actual Messiah. So they're being hypocrites just like the Pharisees, and this is all ancient pagan god worship you need to stop doing. It's a huge abomination to God, and it's going to send a lot of people to hell, unfortunately. So please repent from this. Do you got anything else to add, Bible Thumper?
I mean, it's just a mockery of God, right? First of all, they start calling Yeshua God. They start mocking him that way. That's probably the last thing Yeshua would want, right? And then obviously they go and say, "Oh, he's resurrected on Sunday, and then now we're gonna go feast on the day that God told us nothing about to feast in the Bible." So I
Right.
mean, they just start making up whatever they want to keep, and they start doing that, like you said, the traditions of men. So just don't do that.
Yeah. And I actually did, I'll just briefly mention them because there's no point in just like doing a bunch at the end, but I did have some other ones written down. Revelation 18:23. It warns you that for by your sorceries were all nations deceived. It's talking about Babylon right there. And well, originally all this stuff originates from Babylon. So this is warning you about Easter, one of them at least, and then also like the other pagan celebrations we do. Revelation 2 verses 14 and 12, 14 and 20, they both say it's the Messiah talking to the end days churches, telling them to stop eating food sacrificed to idols. So he's telling the end days churches to stop doing this. And well, what are we doing today? Put two and two together. He's talking about Easter and the other celebrations we do. Deuteronomy 12 verses 2 to 3 and then 30 to 32. That tells you not to learn the ways that the other nations serve their gods and do the same for our God. And that's exactly what they're doing. Deuteronomy 31, 28 to 32, really just all of 32, Deuteronomy 32, that's quoted in Revelation 15, verse 3, about how they provoked him to God with strange new gods that newly came up. And well, really, it's just new iterations of the same God. But the point is, Deuteronomy 32 is end days prophecy about them provoking God to anger. So just go look into all these. There's like so much prophecy against the end days churches doing pagan god worship, idolatry. And this is one of the things that it's talking about. So absolutely stay as far away you can from this celebration. It's paganism and it's idolatry, and God hates it. So anything else?
No, that's all.
All right.